This is light work. Come on, spill the tea. Yeah. Ooh.
Hey y'all,
What's good?
I'm Laura.
And I'm Dee, and welcome to Spill the Tea with Laura and Dee.
What's our topic today?
I'm glad you asked. Our candid combo today is on the phone and not on the computer. Cashless closings, buy with $0 at the table.
I love that.
Closing table.
I love that. So I think first it's important that buyers understand what they have to pay for at the closing. So I think a lot of times people think that they just have a down payment and they get, if they're buying a $200,000 house, they're doing say 10% down, they've got 20,000 in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
They're excited because they think they can close. Well, there's closing costs.
Right.
And a lot of times the closing costs are what we're trying to eliminate because most of us have the down payment. And if you don't have the down payment, then there's zero down loans or loans that sometimes help with the down payment. So a lot of times it's that closing cost you're trying to eliminate.
Right.
My first tip is creative purchasing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're buying a foreclosure.
Right.
I think with creative purchasing, your seller is usually a little more motivated or may have a little bit more wiggle room.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think from there, it's a matter of understanding the costs and figuring out how to get away from the costs. So for us, we borrowed all of our closing costs because the house value was so much more than what we were actually paying for it.
Right.
Because we were getting a deal because it was in foreclosure.
Right. You bring up a good point. What really matters most is understanding the metrics that matter. And the metrics that matter, you can understand those most through underwriting, right? So underwriting, they go through all of the metrics. And the first metric they're going to look at is loan to value for the specific property, right? Before they start to get into your information, especially for investors anyway. And so to your point, the home has a set value, but because of the situation, the value has thus decreased, allowing us to grab it and add that value back.
Correct. And what's cool is the seller's excited, right? And so we always make it a win-win-win when we purchase these properties. But I think understanding what we were needing to borrow, and we have a double closing, right? So it was creative financing, creative. We're buying it from the seller, and then Corman Homes is buying it from you.
Yes, correct.
Correct.
Yeah,
right.
correct.
So there's a double closing there. So that allows us to have some of that cash in our hands that we normally wouldn't. Traditional financing doesn't normally work for this type of stuff either, at least the way we went. So kind of walk us through what it was like to interview and find non-traditional financing. I think that's probably a big question for people. And how do you find it? Where do you look? What are you asking these people? How do you know if they're scammers? How do you know if they're more expensive? Because I know we're looking at 2 loans. A lot of times these creative financing folks, they get paid points up front. So you got to kind of look at all that. What does that look like? Because that's not my lane.
Yeah. So you bring up a good point. Like one of the things you want to watch out for is like the points. When you meet someone that calls themselves a lender.
What's a point for those of us who don't know?
Actually, interest rates, I think people have a easier time understanding. Points is almost like a point in time interest rate, right? And so it's like if you purchase a property for $200,000 and there's 1 point, then $2,000 gets paid, and that's 1 point, which is just 2% of the purchase price.
Can I tell you a little pet peeve of mine?
What's that?
I want to know why the lending world doesn't just call it a percent, because a point is a percent, and it makes my brain explode.
They need to just call it what it actually is. It's just an origination fee.
There you go.
There you go. That's what puts food on the lender's table. The person that you sit across the table from. Higher points are going to be someone that's really just looking to kind of serve themselves in some situations. Or if it's a lower loan, right, it may not make sense for them to do that loan, and so they end up increasing the points. What's that?
What's the price point that most lenders will lend at? What's
like
their minimum?
100,000. 100,000 is the least that they'll loan, and a lot of the times they'll look away from you unless they're adding like 4, 5, 6 7 points on it, and then it's just like, whoa.
So it's actually
over 4.
it's actually 200 for a traditional lender. Most traditional lenders don't really want to see a loan under about 150, 175,000.
Oh,
They really try to push them away unless it's 200,000.
correct. For a traditional lender, it's completely different, because for an untraditional lender, what they're keeping in mind is that these people are getting this stuff at a discount.
Well, not only that, but an untraditional lender usually has a shorter term on their loan, and most of the time you're not going to pay it. You're going to pay it off much quicker.
Right.
Right. You don't want to pay the points plus all that interest.
Right. I see them give you less of a problem for the shorter term than the longer term loans.
Really?
At a smaller amount.
So how did you find your non-traditional lenders?
Yeah, I did a little bit of networking. I just went to a couple of different like real estate meetups before COVID.
Before COVID, okay.
And then a couple after COVID, but it was mostly before COVID that I would actively go out.
Yep.
Some of the folks I met, I just kept up with. And then every time a deal comes through, part of my process is, okay, we've either got a conditional acceptance or we've got an acceptance. Send this out to every lender you have a relationship with.
So what I hear you saying is you're making our lenders fight for our business.
Oh, absolutely.
To some degree.
Yeah, because otherwise what happens is, you know this, I know this, and everybody that's bought a house maybe once or twice knows this. When you go to buy the house, like your heart drops, and any little thing just kind of stresses you out. For me, it's the finances. So it's like, I got to make sure the finances are in place. Right, so I want to back up. I want to back up. I want to back up to the backup.
Well, and I think we look at what financial option makes the most sense.
Correct, right?
I think,
and so that's what helps with the selection process, but then also gives us a little bit of assurance that, okay, if for whatever reason this relationship goes sour, we've got another one who also fought for our business.
Correct. And I think it's been good for us to have the lenders fight for us. And in a traditional mortgage, you're not going to have that. Like they don't care.
No.
They don't care. They don't care at all.
Right.
But non-traditional lenders do. And I find that you'll get a little bit more, they're more negotiable, and you'll get a little bit more wiggle room out of them. And then they, once they've gotten your business and they've earned it, they don't lose it.
Right.
So a lot of times, the longer you work with a lender, and I think that's one of the carrots that we've seen that I've always found weird. Like, well, if you work with me for 3 deals, I'll let you only put 15% of your own money down next time. Right? Having that, you're the product all of a sudden.
Right.
How much supply can you create for yourself? Right? How many? Well, I'm looking at 5 different lenders.
Right.
What are you going to do different?
Right.
Because some of them are very expensive and some of them are
absolutely.
not great.
Absolutely. And it's like they all have different terms, right? There are some like lenders that I want to work with more often, but now it's like it's hard to apply for them because what they'll do is they'll actually give you the funding up front.
Got it.
And so it's like you also don't make payments on it. Whereas, the other lenders that are like, oh, absolutely, we're happy to work with you. It's like they have a payment. It's a short-term loan. That there's a renewal fee, a draw fee.
That's where they get you.
Correct.
Is fees. Don't worry about your closing costs. It's your fees.
Right. For rentals, they have like the DSCR loans where they base it on the debt to income based on the incoming rents.
They don't look at your debt to income. They look at each individual project, and if the project makes sense,
correct,
then they move forward with it there.
Correct. And those are set up for 30-year terms, so a little bit more closer to what you would see for like a traditional lender, but
I think that's
untraditional terms.
Well, I think that's a little scary for some people because a lot of times untraditional lenders, you hear, oh, I've got to get paid back in 6 months to a year when you're watching HGTV, and you hear them talking about, oh, I was using hard money and it cost this much or whatever.
Right.
There are options for longer time frames to where, and there's no prepayment penalty, so you can sell it early and not worry about not fulfilling the 30-year term of the mortgage.
Right. Also, what I found is the good wholesalers, which are really just like unlicensed realtors in a sense for people in distress.
They're very specific. They're matchmakers for sure.
Right. What we're talking about is a backup for them, right? So they're actually going out. They're really looking out for the homeowner. Yes, they have a fee assigned to themselves.
Right.
But then at that point, what that allows is if this property doesn't get eaten up like a hot cake, like I expect it to with my market, I can tell the homeowner, worst case scenario, I have an offer for you.
Right.
And then they can basically sacrifice that assignment fee to cover what would have been closing costs
Right.
or cash that you need at the table.
Right. And that's kind of what we did when we bought.
Correct.
We took no profit when we did the pass through. And so
Mhm.
our profit became the closing cost
Correct.
for our part of the
Correct.
purchase.
Correct. I feel like it's more sustainable doing it that way. I feel like a lot of the times this is where people can get kind of greedy and you see the stuff not be sustainable, right? The house gets sold, somebody else gets into it, you do it again, and then it's just bound for something to happen.
Well, and there has to be a plan, right?
Right.
So we looked at selling this house when we were first going in with the foreclosure freedom program for this
Mhm.
client. The thought was we were going to sell it. And
Yeah,
then
because the numbers were fantastic. But
and
then
now the market is not fantastic.
right.
So it makes more sense for us to do a long-term hold. And I think being able to switch
Mhm.
and change and having plan A, plan B, and knowing, like, project what you're doing,
It was C and D, by the way.
of course. Probably all the way to Z.
Oh, absolutely. You know it. That works out pretty well because what I had in mind was the experience for the client or the homeowner, right? Because we were responsive enough and adaptive enough to see the numbers in the market, the data in the market, to where what we prevented is, okay, well, let's just go ahead and list it out here and it just sits there for 120 days,
Right. Well,
160
that's what
days,
we were
180
avoiding.
days, right?
And so for the unit itself, the market the unit's in, for the seller and for us, it made more sense to just
Correct.
get a tenant in there.
Correct.
Everybody gets their cash quicker.
Correct.
I would say that's how you become able to purchase houses with no
Absolutely.
cash at closing. Is
Absolutely.
understand your closing and then be creative, right?
Right.
There's a lot of ways to pass it through. A very simple trick is if the closing's 5,000 and you've negotiated everything, once you have your appraisal,
Mhm.
if there's room in that appraisal to go up, nobody
Right.
questions if you borrow more money,
Right.
right? And so you can say, hey,
Exactly.
Mr. Seller, I'm going to give you $2,000 more,
Mhm.
but I want you to pay that towards my closing costs.
Exactly.
So it kind of passes through into the loan.
I agree. I would like to throw in my 2 cents on the retail side too, because the first house I bought, I didn't pay any closing costs.
Of course you didn't. I was your realtor.
Yeah. Right. But at the same time, one, while I had a fantastic realtor, me being open to those creative options allowed me to get into that property. And when I turned around and sold it like 3 years later, I got $20,000 back.
Correct. It's like, oh, I don't want to build $2,000 and I'm borrowing more. That's very
Right.
short-sighted thinking.
Right. Now, in saying that, the only thing I want to caution is, again, kind of looking at what they're looking at from an underwriting perspective. Like, for instance, if the house is worth $200,000 and you're getting a loan for $200,000, well, realize any swing in the market puts you underwater. You want to understand, okay, you got to have some kind of equity walking into that house with no cash for it to truly be a sustainable deal down the line.
Or understand how long you have to hold the house before there is cash. I mean, my buyers and I are talking about that exact thing right now as we're
Right.
buying.
Right.
Because, I have a first-time home buyer who's closing here in a little while. He's very excited,
Mhm.
but I had to kind of bring him back down to earth because there's a chance that a house in his neighborhood over the next 6 months, as the buyer's market continues to get stronger and stronger,
Right.
that he's going to be like, well, why did I pay $138,000? I can't believe we found a house in Atlanta that was livable for $138,000, but we did. Why did I pay I know. But why did I pay this $138 when, say, 4 months later somebody paid $130? So we've kind of had that conversation, and we future paced where that property is going to be in 5 years when he gets ready to sell it. And so, or gets ready to, I don't think he wants to sell. I think we're going to try to keep this, but we have talked about what that's going to look like. So when you're purchasing a home, it's important to future pace that market and understand your 3, 5, and 7 year and maybe your 10-year as exit strategy, or at least have some kind of thoughts behind that.
Right.
Like don't just buy a house.
Right. Yeah. And then also think about, like, what I think about every time I buy a house is what value can I bring here?
Correct.
Right. Because that helps with, if you're buying at a certain point, at certain value, you can add more value to it and you see a different value within that. That's a perfect situation.
Correct. And sellers are starting to sell based on condition. So as a buyer, you really do have the ability to go in and say, hey, Mr. Seller, I know that the house is worth $800,000, but I'm only willing to pay $750 because it's only worth $800 when the kitchen is done.
Right.
And so when you're able to do that and you're able to evaluate the market and you understand how to buy a home from data and not emotion, then all of a sudden you now have $50,000 that appraisal is probably going to swing a little bit, right? Because the work is perceived value. How much is it for you? I mean, there's a cost for the material, but you might put in a $10,000 stove and I might put in a $2,000 stove. Right. My dad told me the other day he spent like $6,000 on his stove. I'm like, I just spent 600. Right. Like he's got a little bitty fart.
A nice stove?
No, like I don't know. I
Better
don't
be
ask.
lined in gold.
I know it's an electric stove, and there is no such thing as nice and electric. Period.
Right.
But and you should see them when you get something, when water pops out of the pot boiling noodles and it gets, oh my God, you thought that World War III was about to start. So we don't talk about that. So what you spend on it is different, right? And so when the appraiser comes in, the appraiser has to kind of think, okay, as a whole, what is this worth? And when you find out what that appraised value is, especially if you've had an aggressive agent who's negotiated based on condition for you, and who's explained that to the seller and made the seller see your side, then at that point, you now have that room to say, okay, Mr. Seller, I want these things covered. I'm willing to cover them, but this is what we're going to do the contract. And you have that offer price a little bit. And then you're able to build that in there. I see a lot of things get taken care of in homes, you know, with that little bit of wiggle room.
Right. You know what time it is?
What time is it?
It's time for question quickies. So we've got two related to closing costs, actually. One, can I roll my closing costs into my mortgage loan?
Yes, we just kind of talked about that. You can have the seller pay for some of it or try to negotiate that. Right now, sellers are paying for three things at a pretty high level right now. And I think it's probably the most three valuable things that we've ever seen a seller pay for. You know, when I first got in the industry, sellers were paying for home warranties. That's $600. What do you do?
Right. And they'll fight about it.
Oh, and like
do I have to pay a home warranty?
Right.
Like, well, yes, everyone else did it.
Correct. And then they were paying for a termite letter, right? So sellers were getting away with under $1,000 of extras for buyers. Now they were, when I first got in the industry, guaranteeing to pay the buyer's agent compensation, or at least the vast majority of sellers were. We're still seeing that right now, right? Being a buyer's market, the buyer's like, hey, listen, Mr. Seller, I'll buy your house, but you got to pay for my agent.
Right.
That fee shifts. If there's multiple offers, usually that's the first to go. Right, a buyer's willing to come in and pay that. We are seeing sellers pay for the closing cost, and we are seeing sellers pay for some kind of buy down in your interest rate. Sellers can prepay those points, like we were talking about earlier with the loans. They can prepay the points, which then buys the interest rate down for the buyer over the course of the loan. In a lot of cases, that's a really good deal. And if it were me and I was working with a buyer, I would encourage my buyer to get those two things paid down before closing costs, because closing costs is pretty easy to roll into the cost of the loan when you just up that price. Say, hey, Mr. Seller, you've already paid for all of this. I appreciate it. But I'm going to up the cost of the house, right? I'm going to give you $205 because it appraised for $207. And you're going to give me the $5,000 back. And the beauty of, in the state of Georgia at least, is you don't have to tell the seller what the appraised value of the home is. So if you did end up with a good $10,000, $20,000 worth,
it's always negotiating, I feel like.
Well, if it doesn't appraise, it is, right? So you negotiate the price, but if it does appraise or appraises for higher, then you don't ever have to tell the seller that, right? And so you could go to the seller and say, hey, Mr. Seller, there was a little bit of wiggle room. I'd like to get my closing costs covered. And that's how you roll that into your loan. Now, we are starting to see the loans tend to follow the need of the consumer, just like any other product does.
Which is why Rocket Mortgage is like, pay 1% and down payment.
So we've got a lot of 0% down payments right now. Georgia Dream, people are starting to talk about that a lot again. There's another one that goes past Georgia Dream, where Georgia Dream is a little bit more salary focused. This one, you've got a little bit more wiggle room, but it still goes through Georgia Dream. So the lenders are going to start focusing their loans on the buyer's needs, because they have to eat. Right. And if their loans aren't conducive to how the buyers can borrow, they've got to figure out how. So I think that as things progress, when you purchase a car, the car industry has shifted. You can borrow 125% in most cases on a new car, and you can pay off any negative equity you're in the old car with the, I know I did it. Right. As a kid, I bought a stupid car purchase, and when I bought my adult car, I was upside down. And so we just borrowed more than what the Honda Pilot was worth when I borrowed it. And I have a feeling that you'll see more loans come up with something creative and more conducive to paying that closing cost.
Right.
And keeping the buyer responsible for the down payment, keeping the buyer responsible at the upfront cost for some kind of ownership in the product,
Right,
so
skin
that
in the
they're
game.
correct, so that they're more likely to
Because
hold on.
otherwise, you're just having renters that you're confusing into
There you go.
ownership, and then they're just
There you go.
going in upside down.
Correct. I think we'll continue to see some kind of down payment be required.
Right.
But I do think we'll find that the closing costs will be able to be rolled in over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. And I'm interested to see if the mortgage terms end up swinging to 40 years over 30. No one pays a house off anymore. It doesn't make sense. I was talking to a client the other day, right? Like, a lot of people live in a house for 7 to 10 years.
Right.
This client's at the house at 11. One more year, they're going to be paying capital gains. Doesn't have to move, but they've gained $500,000 in the property. And so I'm interested to see over the next decade how the mortgages conform to the consumer's needs.
Right.
And I think we'll see a 40-year mortgage. I do.
I do too.
I do.
Honestly,
Nobody pays
I
them
was
off.
thinking 45, right?
Fine.
Yeah, because it's like you have your 15-year mortgages and then your 30-year mortgages, and it's like the 15 are the folks that are aggressive that want to pay it down.
Yeah.
The 30-year is like the folks that don't want to pay it down anymore, and then for me, it's just like, okay, we'll just add another 15 years for the folks that are just trying to get into home ownership.
Correct. I don't know. I'll be interested to see, but you definitely
Same, yeah.
You definitely can roll those closing costs into the mortgage if there's room on the appraisal, right? The
Right.
home has to be, you can't borrow more than the home is valued at.
Right.
And you have to also be careful because you can only get back a certain dollar amount from the seller. So most loans cap out at 6%.
Right. Okay.
So you do have to be careful. And that's why, again, you want to have the seller allocate some of those funds
Right.
to your agent's compensation first,
Right.
right? Because that is not closing costs. That's not
Mhm.
something that dings you as the buyer.
Costs, right. Another question that I think is really good for this topic. What are closing costs and what fees do they cover when buying a home?
That's a great question.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't know the answer to that question. There are a couple things that are covered in closing costs. Some of them are not closing costs. They're called prepaids. So you actually pay
right.
2 fees.
Mhm.
Most buyers lump them in under one sum of closing costs.
Right.
The seller can pay both of those fees, but it has to be negotiated correctly on the contract.
Right.
First part of that is going to be, let's talk about your prepaids, because that's your taxes and your insurance.
Right.
When you purchase a home,
And interest if you have a loan.
when you purchase a home, you pay ahead on taxes and insurance, and you pay behind on the mortgage for the month. So if you buy July 15th, September 1st is going to be your first mortgage payment. So at closing, you have to pay the taxes and the insurance for July 15th through the end of July and August, prepaid.
Right.
Same with insurance, because that insurance is paid, but it goes into your escrow account.
Right.
So what you prepay on that at closing
Right.
is what is the beginning of your escrow.
Right.
In addition to that, you pay for the first year that you use your mortgage. So you pay for it's usually 11 to 15 months of insurance first. You got to prepay for your first year of insurance. What goes into escrow is actually for your second year. That's the beginning of your second year, right? Because this time next year, they have to pay for your number 2's insurance. And then in November, they'll pay the tax.
The year time frame where you're paying kind of like a year in advance or 11 months in advance, that's the insurance.
Correct.
And then
the tax.
The one that matches the taxes where you're kind of going out and prepaying like taxes, that also includes the interest.
Yes.
Got it.
So that's your prepaids. The other things you are going to pay, all of your loan costs.
Yes.
Okay, so
underwriting fee
origination
or some
fee,
kind of document fee, legal review fee sometimes. If
title
it's
insurance
title insurance.
for
They may
you and the
also
lender.
have, yes.
So times 2.
Depending on the lender, they may also have like a draw fee. If you're doing like one of those FHA with the like where you can like fix up the house.
So I've never closed one of those. I don't know what all those those fees look like, but I do know that I've closed with them with conventional, and there's different fees on that. And a lot of times with those loans, there's a double closing fee because you've got
Right. And then, like you said, the title fee, which is usually like 1%. And then you have the actual closing office may charge
The closing
additional,
attorney. The closing attorney's got to get paid.
additional fees, right? And so that's like what a recording with the county, that's always in there.
So a lot of
And then-
times those are always pass-throughs. So anything that it costs the title company or your closing attorney, they don't charge extra on that.
Right.
So it's
you're
it's a
absolutely
pass-through.
right. It's a pass through.
And sometimes there is a filing fee, and those are all going to be pass-through fees. There's going to be your title company fee on there. If you're the seller, you might have a wiring fee, right? That's going to be a fee that'll be on there. As far as fees at closing, that's usually the only fee that the seller pays. Most of the fees are going to be buyer fees. A seller may agree to pay them, but at the beginning terms of the contract, it's understood that they're on the buyer side.
Right.
And so those are kind of your three main buckets: your prepaid, your taxes and your insurance, your title company or your closing attorney, and then your lender fees.
Correct.
And it's all broken down. So if you have questions about
The settlement statement.
the settlement statement,
love
the
that
Alta,
darn
the
thing.
CD, it comes three
The
different
HUD
ways.
statement, right?
There's a lot of ways we show you your numbers, but it's all broken down line item by line item, and there's debits and credits on both sides. So you can see what the seller is getting a credit for or paying, and what the buyer is getting a credit for or paying, and then it goes all the way down and adds everything up. So it's very
Always
transparent.
start from the bottom. Cash at closing.
Me too. That's what everybody cares about. Me too. How much cash do you have to bring? How much cash you getting?
And then I go up. It's like, where did this money come from? Whose is this? Take those taxes back.
I started at the bottom too. That's so funny.
Oh, man. Well, that about wraps us up for today. Thanks for joining us on Spill the Tea with Laura and Dee. As always, if you thought this was helpful and or entertaining, hit the heart or send to a friend. And if you have a question at all for a real estate professional or a flipper, drop a note below and we'll cover it in an upcoming video.
This is light work. Come on, spill the tea. Yeah. Ooh.